We have a major Mitch Marner update as a brand new report has dropped revealing some very interesting details surrounding Mitch Marner and his future in Toronto. And what the report has to say may shock you. So to break down the exact report and discuss what it means going forward for the Toronto Maple Leafs as the season inches closer and closer and is about a month away. Stay tuned for all that in this episode. But before we do, if you're part of the percentage that aren't subscribed to the channel, about 70% of you who are watching right now aren't subscribed. Hit that subscribe button. It would mean the world to Darius and myself as we make daily Leafs videos. We're on the road to 12,500 subscribers. But Darius, this has been a very busy day in Leafs land. We obviously had the Nick Robertson update, which was very interesting and surprised both of us, quite frankly, because it seems like he's going to stay with the Maple Leafs. Check out the video from earlier today if you haven't already. But we have a Mitch Marner update as well that came in lieu of all this Nick Robertson stuff. And let's just dive right into it. So there's a lot to digest here, and we're going to dive into it all. So let's just start with, it was from Darren Dreger. He said, the Maple Leafs and Mitch Marner are in a good place, but an extension isn't likely to happen anytime soon. Both sides appear to be fine with that, as there doesn't seem to be much rush at this stage. A long-term extension is something Marner could want with the Leafs, as long as it makes sense long-term. The understanding from the Leafs is that Marner will get paid well, whether it's them or another team. So a lot of things to dive into here. But Darius, let's get your thoughts on this one. So it seems like they're in a good place, which is good, I guess. But like we've been saying now, like we've been saying for the past few weeks now, even past couple months, seems like he's going to start the season with Toronto and that he's going to play it out this year.
Yeah, obviously he's not going to get traded at this point in time. We were talking about it earlier in the summer. That has passed. If it was going to happen, it was going to happen right there, July 1st free agency, and it did not happen. So he's not getting traded, and to trade him at the trade deadline just doesn't make sense for the Leafs. So they're going to see this through for the rest of the season, but we will have to see what happens after that. And the last time we talked about Mitch Marner, I said my feeling on it is that the Leafs do not have an extension in place with this player. The player probably doesn't want an extension in place until after this season, because I think he's going to go off for a monster season. And I feel like both sides are kind of okay with that, because if Mitch Marner doesn't perform in the playoffs again, I feel like the Leafs might be okay with potentially letting him walk. And on the other side of it, like I mentioned, Mitch Marner wants to have a monster season this year and get as much money as possible. And is he worth it? I think so. He's going to get it from another team if it's not the Leafs, but does it work for the Leafs? So there's a lot riding on this season. And there's a few more things we're going to dive into that Dreger brought up as well that are pretty interesting, but that alone is pretty interesting this season. It doesn't seem like it's going to get done. Certainly not before the season starts. I don't think it'll get done during the season either. I feel like it's really going to heat up probably around the trade deadline. And as we move closer to obviously the playoffs, and after the playoffs, they'll start talking and really getting down to it. But I don't think, if there is an extension to be had, I don't think it's going to happen until the end of this coming season.
Yeah, and it seems like no extension is going to, like you mentioned, is going to happen this offseason. And that's a bit scary if you're a Leafs fan, because now we're heading into this upcoming season with a player that could put up 100 points, whatever it ends up being, a very good winger, entering his contract year without a contract in place. And that puts a very interesting amount of pressure on Brad Treliving going forward, because there is a chance that, let's say they go into next season, they do very good, they lose in the second round. Then what do you do surrounding Mitch Marner? You don't have him under contract. Other teams are going to be willing to pay him a boatload of money, and now the Leafs are stuck in a spot where they either have to choose to pay Mitch Marner or let him walk and get the free cap space. So that's going to be the biggest question mark. Obviously, if they make it really, really deep into the Stanley Cup Finals or even just into the third round, then it's a lot easier to justify extending Mitch Marner. But they haven't even gotten close to that under this core, and it's been a very long time since they have. So it's very interesting. And some other points, again, the fact that the Leafs and him are in a good place is good, but don't mistake it with the belief that an extension is looming or will happen quickly. Obviously, it's good that the sides aren't on any bad terms, because ultimately both sides want to win hockey games, and that's ultimately what it comes down to. But the extension won't happen anytime soon, and both sides are okay with that, which is a little bit surprising, but at the same time, it kind of makes sense. I don't think the Leafs want to tie up $12-13 million a year right now, and I don't think Mitch Marner wants to lose himself out on any money here.
No, I think Mitch Marner wants to stay in Toronto, and I think Mitch Marner wants to make a lot of money, and that makes sense for him, right? He's a really good player. He plays in all situations, and he's an elite player in the league, right? But for the Leafs, they have to see if it makes sense. This is a player, like we talked about, doesn't have too many playoff moments, and everyone keeps up bringing the stats that he leads the Leafs, except for last year, in points every year in the playoffs. But, sometimes they're in the first two games of a series, and then what happens after that? You have to look at that. And if he's not going, how does he make himself useful? So one thing that I've been thinking about that I haven't really heard anywhere else is, I think the hiring of Craig Berube has a lot to do in this situation as well, because if Mitch Marner doesn't change the way he plays, and the whole team for that matter, I'm not just singling out Mitch Marner, but this video is about Mitch Marner. But if he doesn't change the way he plays, and they see, and we as fans see the same as what we've been seeing the last couple of years, especially in this playoffs, I feel like the organization will have an easier time pivoting away from Mitch Marner and possibly not extending him, letting him walk in free agency. So I think there's a lot this season. There is a lot to look for. Does the mindset change, right? Do the Leafs start to become instigators, like I've been talking about as well, in the playoffs? They don't do that. The physicality has to come up, right? From everybody. It's not just Mitch Marner, all the star players, including him, though. So if there is no change in that way, I feel like the Leafs might be okay with letting him walk. So we just have to see what happens this season, honestly, right? We have to see what happens, especially in the playoffs. In terms of regular season, I think he's going to go off. He's going to finally hit 100 points. He'll probably surpass it, right? He's going to have a great year. Whenever someone's in a contract year, they always do that. So there's going to be a lot of pressure on Tree Living to get a contract extension done. But, if he doesn't perform, then maybe there isn't, right? Maybe everyone's okay with letting him walk and a new era begins, right? But it's going to be very interesting to watch. A lot riding on the season. I think a lot of it has to do with Craig Berube as well, and if he can change the mindset of a lot of the top guys. So it's going to be interesting. We saw a lot of his teammates, kind of yelling at him in the playoffs as well. I brought up last week, like Nylander was yelling at Marner on the bench, so it seemed in last year's playoffs. So there has to be a mindset change this year. And if there's not, then maybe fans and management alike will be okay with walking away from this idea.
Yeah, and obviously the Craig Berube thing factored a lot into the Nick Robertson decision to what we expect is for him to sign a contract before opening night against the Habs. And I had this up while you were speaking. There's some interesting things here. You can see the second half of this paragraph where it says, basically, it's going to be a top-of-the-mind story from the beginning of training camp and obviously, until the day extension is done. And that's one of the things that is, like we've been discussing here, is a pretty big underlying factor is the fact that it's going to be a bit of a distraction the entire year. Hopefully not for the players, but I think ultimately for Mitch Marner and for the front office a little bit, because it's going to be a looming question mark, and a very big looming question mark at that, because he's obviously going to be commanding a ton of money. And again, if you go back through what he said, Darius did up a little summarization of everything Darren said on the radio show. Basically, to summarize everything, Marner wants a long-term extension. The Leafs also want that as long as it makes sense for both sides. And clearly, because they haven't agreed on a contract at this point, there hasn't been a extension talk that hasn't been beneficial for both sides yet. And like you mentioned, they aren't there yet. Talks could heat up around the deadline. Marner will get paid, and will get paid whether it's in Toronto or elsewhere. And talks in the deadline surrounding a contract, probably not surrounding a trade at this point, but who knows? Maybe, unless the Leafs completely bottom out and they think that but even if they don't think they're going to extend him, they're going to keep Mitch Marner because they're trying to make a playoff push. So there's no world, I don't think, anymore where Mitch Marner gets traded even up until the deadline. I think there's a much better chance that he signs an extension, and maybe he signs an extension that's a bit shorter than we think, with the possibility for them to trade him in the future if things aren't working out for both sides there. But a pretty big update today, and didn't really expect it. A lot of news came out today.
A lot of news today. We love Mondays for that reason, right? And it's pretty interesting with Mitch Marner heading into this season, right? A lot's riding on this season. Like, we have no idea what the future holds for this player. Again, I will maintain that I think he's a great player and will probably make a lot of money next year, right? And it may or may not be on the Leafs. So we're just gonna have to wait and find out what happens this year and how he performs during the regular season. Because at the end of the day, I'm a Leafs fan, right? We're all Leaf fans watching this. We want the Leafs to succeed. So Mitch Marner, I don't think he's going to get traded this year, and that's fine. I hope he performs well, and I hope the team performs well. And I hope there's a little bit of a change in that mindset and they can succeed in the playoffs. And if there isn't, this, no better time than to switch your philosophy than with, letting somebody walk in free agency like that and using that salary cap on somebody else. But we'll see. I'm hoping that things do change, but we'll have to see how it goes this season.
Yeah, let us know in the comments your thoughts are on this. A lot of news came out today, and hopefully Mitch Marner puts up a very productive season with Toronto and everything figures itself out. But let us know in the comments your thoughts are. We'll see you tomorrow.